Alright, so now we're ready to actually step through the algorithm for the input as shown on the left of the screen here. And this is the beginning of our stack with state 0, the start state of the DFA, at the top of the stack. So what do? We're in state 0. We look ahead and our input is a identifier, so we know we're going to shift and move to state 5. So that gives us 5, ID at the top of the stack. And so what I will do is actually make that the new instance of the stack. Our previous one was the first line. This is our second line. So now this is the current stack, and we're ready to go through the loop again, having completed that shift action, and also move the cursor forward so that the current input is now the plus symbol. Right, so we say fine, we're in state 5. We see a plus. What do? We do a reduction by production number 6. And so what does that tell us to do? That is this state, this phrase here, we're reducing by number 6, right? So 6 is factor goes to identifier. Right? So that tells us that we're going to end up with a factor on the top. And the right-hand side is just one symbol long, so we're going to end up with 0, underscore. Good grief, 0, underscore. At the top of our stack, we popped off the identifier. We're going to now push onto the stack something with a factor, right? But where do we go to, right? So we're looking at state 0, and so from state 0, on an F, what does the go-to table tell us? It tells us we're going to go to state 3, right? So that's encoded over here in the go-to table. All right. So now we're ready to go through this process again, right? We don't shift the input because we did a reduction. And so we again have 0 underscore at the top, and we're going to do that reduction. Right? So we go through, we're in state 3, we're looking still at the plus, and now we're going to do a reduction by production number 4. So number 4 is term derives a factor. So again, we're going to pop off the right-hand side of the production, the alpha, which is just the factor. That's one symbol, and we're going to ask where do we go to, right? So from state 0, when we did a reduction by 4, that's a term. So in state 0 with a term, we're going to go to state number 2. So it's 2 and a term at the top. And so we're ready to proceed, right? So we go through the loop again, look at the top of the stack. So we're now in state 2. We're looking at a plus. Now we do a reduction by production number 2, which is expression derives a term. Right? So if we're going to do a reduction, we've popped the top of the stack, the right-hand side of that production, just the term goes away. Where do we go to? Right? Well, we look at 0 and T and 0 and an E because we made a reduction to an E, right? And that tells us to go to state 1. So now we go through the loop again. We're in state 1. We see still that plus is still hanging around, right? And now what we're going to do is shift it onto the stack. So we see S and a 6 tells us that we're going to go to state 6 and a plus at the top of the stack. We do the shift and our input moves over. So our next input is the identifier. All right, so we go through this loop again. We see a 6 is at the top of the stack. So what is the action when we see an S, a 6, and an ID, right? So state 6, ID, here's what we're looking at. It's a shift, and we go to state 5. Right, so now the top of our stack is an E, followed by a plus, followed by an identifier. All right, so what happens next? So now we go through the loop again. We're in state 5. We're here we go. We're going to shift this over. This is the thing I keep forgetting, right? So we are in state 5, and the input is a star, all right? So my pause here was looking at state 5, thinking the input was an ID. And, well, that would be bad, right? If it was an identifier, we would have an error because there's nothing to do. There's no action here. But, of course, I just failed to move this forward. So we really are looking at a star. So in state 5, with a star, we do a reduction, again, by production number 6, right? So you say, all right, so we'll copy this down. We're going to pop the right-hand side of that off. And so we're reducing by production number 6, which is going to leave us a factor at the top. A factor is going to be put on there. So we look and say, well, where do we go? All right, we're going to go from state 6. We're looking at state 6, and what do we do on a factor? This takes us to state number 3. So we're in 3, comma, F. Right? And so now we sort of notice that we had 3F at the top of the stack here. We also had it back here at this position. So these are sort of similar configurations where looking ahead is going to tell us what we're going to do with our inputs. So these are our similar configurations of our parse stack. All right, so we're in state 3. We go through the loop, right? What do we do in state 3 where the input is still a plus, right? So we'll still want to do that reduction, right? So we're now going to reduce that factor to a term. Okay, so we are at this point where we pop something off the stack, right? We're doing the reduction by the rule that says a term derives a factor. So this is production number 4, right? That's what we saw here, right? And we say, well, what do we go to? Well, we're going to look at state 6 and a term. So in state 6 with a term, we go to state number 9. All right, and we now go back to the top of the loop and go through this again. So again, we pull the state off the top of the stack. We're in state 9. We are still looking at that star as the next input. So in state 9 with a star, okay, now we're in a different configuration. We want to shift that star, right? So this was something we wondered about before, that when we see a term at the top of the stack, do we reduce it to an expression, right, using production number 2? Or do we want to think, no, we need to shift a multiply first? And so now the DFA is telling us exactly what we need to do. In this configuration, right, where we're in state 9 in a term, we do a shift, right? So in state 9 with a star, we shift into state 7 and put the star on the top. Right? So we want to sort of recognize that we were in a position here where term was at the top of the stack, but we are in state 2. Right now we are in state number 9. Or we're in state number 9 before we do this shift. So we did the shift, remembering now to move the cursor over, so our input now is identifier. So we go back to the top of the stack. We're in state 7, right? So in state 7, when we see an ID, what do? We shift and go to state number 5. So we copy the contents of our stack, and we are now in state 5 with an identifier. We did a shift. We move our cursor over, so we're looking at the end of the input now. We go back to the top and say, okay, we're in state 5. We're looking at the end of the input, the $sign, so we do a reduction by production number 6, right? And production number 6 is factor derives ID. So we can remove that so we get the beginning of our new stack. Right, we're doing a reduction. We need to know where do we go to, right? So in state 7, where do we go on a factor, reduction to a factor? We go to state 10. Right, so we're going to go to state 10, and that factor became, so this identifier rather became a factor. All right. All right. So again, we can sort of make sure we're in the right spot here. We were in state 5. We saw the ID, so we did a reduction So we're in state 5. We look ahead to see the $. We reduce with production 6, right? Production 6 is going to get us a factor. And so from state 7, when we see a factor, we go to state 10, and we're good to go. All right, so we are in the right configuration here. All right, so what happens next? We go through the loop. So we're in state 10. We're looking ahead to a $. We do a reduction by production number 3, right? So this is our term times factor production. So now these 3 components go away. They're popped off the stack, right? During parsing, we probably take the syntax trees associated with that term and that factor and use them to build the syntax tree for the new term that we're constructing out of those 3 components. And we need to know what are we going to go to, right? So again, the top of the stack was a 6, right? So in the go to from state 6 on a term, we're going to go to state 9, right? So we're in this spot, right? So now you can think, well, this is kind of like what we had up above, right? But now we've consumed more input, right? So this stack and this stack are the same, but at one point we're looking at a term that derived this ID. Now we're at the point where it's the term that's derived all of this input. So the cursor has moved on our input is what has changed, but the stack is in fact the same. So we go through the loop again. We're in state 9. We're looking at a $. At the end as the input. We do a reduction with production number 1. Right, so that's the ETDF, E plus T production. So we're going to remove all of those symbols. Right, we're going to get back to 0 at the top. Where do we go to? Well, we want to look at state 0, where we reduce on an E, and we go to state 1. Right, so state 1 with an E as our stack. So we go through the loop one more time. Right, what's the action? Well, we're in state 1. $. Is the next input symbol. So now we would accept this input. Throughout this process, we've been keeping track of the syntax trees and built that up as we go. And so now we would extract the parse tree from what's associated with this non-terminal we've built here. Right, and we're happily accepted this input. All right. So this is what we've done for that table on this input. I'd encourage you to step through this process for another input. Right? It takes a little bit of time. It's something to pay attention to. You start to understand exactly how the algorithm works. And you'll be well on your way to understanding LR parsing. What we're going to pick up next will be how we build these tables. Right? So there's various mechanisms for doing this, with trade-offs for expressiveness and size of tables and things of that nature. And that's where we'll pick up in class on Wednesday.